It's Friday night in October of 1993. And in Northern California, 3 junior high school girls are having a slumber party. Halloween is around the corner, and the girls have been trying on different costumes in preparation for the upcoming holiday. Within seconds, their lives will change forever. October 1st, Polly Klaas and Jillian Pelham were waiting for another friend outside of Polly's house in Petaluma, California. It was around 8:30 when Kate McLean and her mother showed up. The 3 girls were ready for fun. It was Friday night. There was ice cream in the fridge, and they were going to stay up all night long. This was going to be a party. No one had any idea of the danger that lurked so close by. The girls kept to Polly's bedroom, but they couldn't suppress the noise as easily. At about 9:45, Polly's mother, Eve Nickel, looked in on the girls and asked them to keep it down. She was suffering a migraine headache and thought she'd turn in early. Eve's bedroom was right across the hall from the girls, and although she had chided them about the noise, she was pretty sure it would only take a few minutes for the 12-year-olds to get noisy again. Before going to bed, Eve took her prescription pills to block out all distractions and get her fast to sleep.
Hold on, guys.
The party continued on for almost an hour before the nightmare began.
That was cute. Yeah. I'm gonna get the sleeping bags, okay? Okay.
It was around 10:30 when the intruder entered the room. At first, Kate and Jillian thought it was a joke. Then they saw the knife. He told them if they screamed, he'd slit their throats.
Whose house is this?
Immediately, he tied them up and started asking questions. He wanted to know which girl lived there and who else was in the house. Polly spoke up.
Keeping money around this place.
The girls were terrified and crying.
Is there anybody else home?
And he assured them that he wasn't going to hurt anyone, that he was only there for money.
I don't believe you. Somebody else was supposed to be here.
But when Polly told him where some cash was hidden in a jewelry box, he made no attempt to find it. He gagged the girls and took the cases off some pillows to use as hoods. He made Polly get up and told the others to count to 1,000. By the time they were done, he said she'd be back. Then he took Polly Klaas and disappeared into the night. Petaluma police officers were called to the scene after the girls managed to free themselves and wake Polly's mother. They responded in minutes. Investigators entered Polly's room and began to look around. The bedroom was in disarray and told of the events that had happened just minutes before. On the floor were binding materials, cut strips of cloth. The cords from the Nintendo game had been cut, and a strap that was clipped from a purse lay on the floor. Pillowcases were strewn about.
I know.
What Petaluma Police Detective Mike Meese saw wasn't encouraging.
I remember standing at the doorway to Polly's room and looking at these few bags of evidence that we had been able to collect and thinking that that was just such a pitiful amount. And I looked down at the rug and I talked to my partner, Larry Pelton, and said, let's take the rug. And he said, why? And I said, I don't know why, but let's just take the rug. We just don't have enough evidence.
FBI.
Police were in desperate need of assistance. Fortunately, help was on the way. After being contacted by the Klaas family, the Federal Bureau of Investigation offered its expertise.
How about, have y'all talked to the mother?
Yes.
Shortly after midnight, the FBI appeared at the house of Polly Klaas. Typically, the Bureau handles kidnappings, and with $800 a year to investigate, they have plenty of experience. Because he was familiar with the community and experienced in kidnapping cases, Special Agent Ed Fryer became the lead investigator. But he knew something about this case was different.
It had all the earmarks of a stranger abduction case because the statements from the two girls were consistent. Stranger abduction cases are the hardest cases to solve, in my experience, because, again, there's no connection between the perpetrator of the crime and your victim, or the victim's family, or somebody even associated to the victim. It's a random act.
Surprisingly, a vast majority of kidnappings involved disgruntled family members. And though Polly's parents were separated, her father, Mark Klaas, was immediately cleared of any responsibility. Abductions involving total strangers are exceedingly rare and leave little for investigators to go on. In this case, however, there were witnesses.
Was his hair long or short?
A police sketch artist was called in from the San Rafael Police Department. For 2 hours, Jillian and Kate tried to recall the face of the man who had barged into the bedroom. The girls were still terribly upset, but they managed to give the artist a pretty good description. Authorities now had their first idea of what the stranger looked like.
His nose and mouth.
After 4 a.m., the girls were taken to the police station,
Like this.
and the FBI called in one of its special forces, the Evidence Response Team. Tony Maxwell leads the crew.
In looking at cases across the United States, we have found that when somebody is kidnapped, especially a young child, that they will generally be harmed within the first 24 hours. And probably within the first couple of days could even be killed. So time is of the essence. In that kind of work, the investigator needs to move quickly.
The Evidence Response Team is designed to provide forensic resources at a major crime scene. Their sole responsibility is to collect evidence. And they use the most sophisticated collecting equipment available to do it. An electrostatic dust print machine collects tiny hairs and fibers off the floor when a positive charge is passed over a sheet of mylar. Any loose debris clings to the mylar and is sent to a lab for careful inspection. Although the police department had already dusted for fingerprints, they had come up with nothing particularly promising. But they didn't have access to the same equipment as the FBI. The alternate light source was a new method that employed a unique fluorescent powder, which when combined with a distinct ultraviolet light and amber-colored goggles, could illuminate many things that otherwise would remain hidden. The team found 4 dozen fingerprints the police were unable to see using conventional equipment. But even those were of no use. They were attributed to family and friends. After hours of meticulous searching, something finally turned up.
Still working on it.
Do you have anything?
Yeah, I have some ridge detail in the bedpost here. It looks like it's pretty good ridge detail.
A palm print that at the outset seemed like the first real piece of forensic evidence left behind at the scene.
That palm print was found on the bed, on a crossbar of a bed, where he apparently put his hand up for just a second to lean on it, perhaps to support himself as he was grabbing something. And with the alternate light source and the fluorescent fingerprint work that we did, we were able to see it, collect it, and then gather that for the laboratory.
At that time, the FBI's fingerprint database, AFIS, didn't contain palm prints, only fingerprints. But even a palm print won't catch a suspect. It will only identify one once he's captured. FBI Special Agent Mark Mershon explains.
People often think that when you have a fingerprint or a palm print that you quickly establish the identity of a criminal. The truth of the matter is, in most instances, you have to identify a suspect, have fingerprints for that suspect in order to compare with a latent fingerprint.
The hunt for the suspect prompted authorities to cover Polly's neighborhood inch by inch. By dawn, more than 100 agents and officers had begun a 24-hour search for Polly and her abductor. Helicopters and bloodhounds had been called out, and an all-points bulletin was issued by local authorities and the FBI. Systematically, the authorities searched every house in the neighborhood. Agents went to Polly's school to talk with teachers and students in the hopes that somebody might have some useful information. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood in pairs, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious that night. One by one, they interviewed all of Polly's neighbors. Several people recalled seeing a stranger around the neighborhood that fit the description given by the girls. Thomas Georges and his friends were on their way to the video store at around 9 o'clock that night when he noticed a stranger standing in the shadows in front of Polly's house. Thomas knew everyone in his neighborhood, but he had never seen this man before. Returning home a few minutes later, the boys saw that the stranger was still there. The description Thomas gave to the authorities matched the suspect they were looking for. Sean Bush was playing video games with some friends who lived in a small rental cottage directly behind Polly's house. It was about 10:30 when Sean happened to glance out the window. He was surprised to see a strange man on the back porch of Polly's house. He appeared to be going for the back door. His description of the man also fit that of the suspect. There were others who saw the suspicious man that night, but unfortunately none of them alerted the authorities. As Petaluma Police Chief Patrick Parks explains, time was working against them.
In stranger abduction cases of small children, there is no more critical factor than time. Time is absolutely of the essence. And for that reason, you have to get out as many resources as you can. You have to put out the word as far as wide as you can. You have to involve as many agencies as you can, get them focused, get their efforts channeled, and hopefully bring about a successful resolution.
While officers continued to comb the neighborhood, FBI investigators began executing the standard operating procedure in cases like these. After eliminating family and friends as suspects, they focused on ex-cons who were registered as sexual offenders throughout Sonoma County. Gradually, they branched out to surrounding counties, carefully questioning and investigating each registrant. But nothing turned up.
This is a hard case to believe that it even happened. There's 3 girls, they're in a slumber party. They're playing games in their bedroom, in their home, in a typical community, in a typical city. And somebody can walk into your home, the sanctity of the home, the security of your home, and take your daughter is if it wasn't impossible, was inconceivable.
The following day, the search for Polly Klaas had escalated into the largest manhunt in the nation. A massive community volunteer network was formed to assist authorities. While hundreds of citizens searched, others passed out flyers, trying to cover the entire city as quickly as possible. Back at the FBI's Trace Evidence Lab in Washington, D.C., forensic expert Chris Allen was carefully surveying the items collected from Polly's house.
I noticed that in untying the pieces of bindings, the thin nylon strips of bindings that were used to tie up Polly's girlfriends, that they had jagged edges to them. And I was able to line them up perfectly so that I was able to determine that these all came from one piece of cloth originally, and it was a piece of cloth like a lady's nightgown or a slip material.
Other pieces of evidence found in Polly's room were not so easy to classify. Tiny fibers collected with the electrostatic dust print machine proved to be a challenge to identify. After painstaking examination and comparison, Allen concluded that they had come from the interior carpet of an automobile. Eliminating the cars that could be accounted for at Polly's house, Allen suspected that these carpet fibers were most likely from the kidnapper's car. One more item Allen found was a little more personal to the suspect.
I found in the vacuuming of the area rug that was in Polly's bedroom that she was playing on with her girlfriends, a dark brown, forcibly removed head hair. And I say forcibly removed because it had a 3 or 4 millimeter root sheath on it, actually skin material that comes out of the scalp when the hair is forcibly pulled or yanked out.
If Polly had pulled a hair out of the suspect's head, it was evident that she didn't go without a struggle. But even a hair with DNA evidence couldn't bring investigators any closer to finding a suspect. The palm print lifted from the bedpost was sent to Michael J. Smith, a fingerprint specialist with the FBI. Examining the print under laser light, Smith determined that the print had enough ridge detail to photograph. But the light emitted from the laser turned the print orange, and Smith needed to capture a black print on a white background. He instructed the photographer to reverse the color so that the finished print would appear the way it would on a fingerprint card. Now the print was indelible and could be filed until a suspect was apprehended. Investigators had unearthed some solid evidence, but it wasn't enough. Time was running out, and Polly Klaas was still out there, somewhere. "48 hours after the abduction of Polly Klaas, her father, Mark, got a call.
Polly?
It sounded like Polly.
Okay, honey.
She told her father that she was in a hotel
Where
room
are you?
somewhere, and that her abductor had stepped out for a moment.
Tell me where you are. Polly!
Then the
Polly!
line went dead. It offered the first glimmer of hope. But unfortunately, since Mark's line wasn't set up for a trace,
Detective Fryer,
all
please.
authorities could do was wait for another call. Word of the abduction spread rapidly. In 2 days, 50,000 flyers had been distributed. Community volunteers quickly organized a search command center to work in tandem with the police and FBI. It was an unprecedented grassroots effort. A telephone bank was manned 24 hours a day to field calls and tips. A copy of every lead that was phoned in was shared with the FBI and Petaluma police. Before long, the search center had screened 60,000 calls. Out of those, authorities were compelled to follow up on over 12,000 leads. Processing that amount of data would have been virtually impossible without help from an FBI computer processor.
The FBI just happened to have the Rapid Start team. It was a relatively new concept with the FBI, where on an investigation with a high volume of information, we would computerize that information, essentially triage the value of the investigative leads and make the assignments and track the progress.
Even with so many leads, there was one in particular that investigators were anxious to follow up on. When Mark Klaas received the first call, the FBI was powerless to do anything about it. The second time she called, they were ready.
Hello.
Like the previous call, it sounded like Polly,
how are you, honey?
and she could only talk for a short time before she had to hang up.
Where are you?
But it was long enough for
Okay.
authorities to make a trace.
Polly. Got it.
The FBI had traced the call to a house 30 miles away. There hadn't been enough time to collect an army of agents. The job would have to be handled by a few. But something wasn't right. This was just a normal family home. There was no sign of Polly or her abductor.
What's going on?
A terrible realization dawned on the agents. When they sat down with one of the girls in the house, she confessed to making the calls.
I'm sorry.
She admitted that friends from school had dared her to call and impersonate Polly.
I didn't know.
The entire incident had been a cruel joke.
This was the only indication we had after a week's time that Polly just might be alive still, and we all were poised and hopeful that this would yield a solution and her safe recovery. Of course it didn't.
In mid-October, Kate and Jillian were brought in to give another description of the man who tied them up. A highly acclaimed forensic artist was flown in to make a second sketch.
It was pretty well cut.
The artist was known for relaxing witnesses enough to coax an accurate description from them. The girls were less stressed than they had been that night, and were able to give her more to work with.
No, they were
The second sketch was much more precise. This sketch looked like a person. New flyers were distributed immediately. There was no time to waste.
But if you look back at true stranger abductions, we have this rule of thirds. The children who are abducted, typically 1/3 are recovered alive, 1/3 are recovered dead, and 1/3 are simply never heard from ever again. That's what we faced in this particular investigation, and that, I think, was one of our motivations to keep the sustained effort up.
After a reward had been offered for Polly's return, authorities received a call demanding a $10,000 ransom. They traced the call to a Petaluma apartment building. This time a SWAT team showed up in force. They were not going to take any chances.
FBI! FBI! Down! 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 Man! Down! Down! Cover!
Once again, authorities and the family had been fooled.
Put your hands behind your back. Don't move. Do not move. Going on. Don't move.
20-year-old James Hurd was arrested for attempted extortion and posing as a kidnapper. It was a crushing blow for everyone.
It became very frustrating. It was certainly distracting towards the main thrust of the investigation, but you had to deal with it. There was no way around it. You could not ignore those things. And it certainly chewed up a lot of time and resource.
The family had been especially discouraged. A letter Polly's parents wrote to the kidnapper was published in the October 17th San Francisco Examiner. Whoever you are, wherever you are, please return Polly to her family. She belongs here. We miss Polly so much. We miss the twinkle in her eye and her sweet humor. We long to see her beautiful smile and hear her musical voice. They also addressed Polly. Our darling, if you can read this, please know that your mommy and daddy love you so much, and we will continue to search for you until we can hold you safely in our loving arms again.
I don't think I ever lost hope. So I had numerous contacts with Mark Klaas, with Eve, with members of the family, and that was a question posed to me many times. And my response was no. We have not lost hope. We will not lose hope.
Across the country, people wanted to see Polly brought home. Banners sprang up, and Americans began a candlelight vigil. Thousands donned ribbons of lavender, Polly's favorite color, to show their support of the search.
We conducted searches during the day, during the night. We had a 24-hour operation going. We conducted searches sunny days, on foggy days, rainy nights. Whenever the information came in, we reacted to that because in a case like this, physical evidence is crucial.
The search never stopped. The Navy and search and rescue experts joined the thousands of volunteers who were constantly looking. Police and volunteer task forces worked tirelessly. But it would be nearly 2 months before anything broke. November 28, 1993. It was 2 months after Polly Klaas was kidnapped that authorities got their first real lead.
Thanks for coming, okay? I've got some items I want to show you out in the clearing.
In Sonoma County, a sheriff's deputy was called out to the house of Dana Jaffe. It sat at the end of a long, winding drive off Pythian Road. Dana had been out inspecting her property when she noticed something unusual and thought it might be of use to investigators. She led the deputy through a densely wooded area to a clearing just a few yards from the long, winding drive to her house. Scattered in the woods were a few items that seemed somewhat suspicious. There was a large piece of silk cloth that had been fashioned into what appeared to be a hood. A couple of strips of packing tape were on the ground.
Yeah, it's about 2 months ago. Couldn't do anything about it. They ran his place.
A pair of young girls' tights had been tied into a knot, and human hair was entangled in the knot. Other debris surrounded the area. Then Dana recalled the night she'd caught a trespasser on her property not far from where they stood. It was nearly 2 months before. It all started when Dana's babysitter, Shannon Lynch, had left Dana's house and was making her way back down the long driveway. A man was walking down the middle of the private drive. His stranded Pinto was off to the side.
Get out of the car and help. No, sorry.
He said that he was stuck and insisted that she get out of her car and help. He also wanted to know what was up the drive. But Shannon immediately sensed something wasn't right. She'd later describe him as looking like a wild man. She drove on, leaving him there, determined to get to a phone. Shannon found a payphone about 2 miles down the road and hurried to call her friend. She was anxious to get a hold of Dana and warn her of the scary man trespassing on her land. Dana didn't waste any time. She grabbed her daughter and a baseball bat and took off down the hill. She saw the car, like Shannon had said, but the strange man was nowhere in sight. She continued down into town and called the police. A few minutes after midnight, 2 Sonoma County Sheriff's deputies showed up. Dana explained that she didn't really want the intruder arrested for trespassing. She just wanted him off her property. The deputies found the trespasser, a little agitated. There was alcohol on his breath, and he was sweating profusely. There were bits of leaves and brush in his hair, as if he'd been rolling around on the ground. He told them that he'd been out sightseeing when he realized that he was on private property. When he tried to turn around, he got his car stuck on the side of the drive. He blurted out that he'd been under the car trying to free it, but the deputies didn't believe it. The way his car was trapped, there wasn't enough room for a person to get underneath. The deputies administered some roadside sobriety tests, but he passed them all. Looking in his car, they found some cans of beer in a plastic bag and a small duffel bag in the back seat. When they asked him if he'd been drinking, he actually opened a beer and began to drink it. They immediately made him pour it out and then told him they wanted to pat him down. He became extremely upset.
Just leave me alone. Just keep that stuff away from me, all right?
To make him comply, the deputies told him they would be within their rights to run him in on trespassing. After he'd heard this, he calmed down considerably. They searched him carefully and continued questioning him, but could find nothing incriminating. He was just odd. The deputies remained suspicious, but when they ran his license, it checked out. His driving record was clean, and he had passed the sobriety tests. They had held him for about 45 minutes already, and they had no legal means to detain him any further. There was nothing left to do but pull his car out and send him on his way.
Well, those look like tights, and they look like...
That had been 2 months ago, the same night that Polly Klaas had been abducted.
Nothing good, that's for sure.
A hood, bindings, a young girl's pair of tights. It was too much of a coincidence. Putting it all together, the deputy quickly put a call in to the Petaluma Police Department.
Dispatch. I'm up here on.
Within an hour, Detective Mike Meese and Agent Ed Fryer arrived to check it out.
I'll never forget the scene. It was late at night then. By this time, Mike Meese and I are standing up on the hillside there on Pythian on the road. It was beginning to get a little misty and foggy, and the rain started to come down. And we looked at each other, and we knew in our hearts that we had basically uncovered a very critical crime scene, that this was going to lead us to the resolution of this case.
After the evidence was collected, investigators immediately began searching the Pythian Road site for any signs of Polly.
We spent days searching the mountain with over 300 volunteers. I believe we had 25 to 30 search dogs, and we conducted extensive ground searches for Polly, believing that she was still alive. which was the premise that we were working on.
As the search commenced, everything began to snowball. Authorities checked with the Sonoma County Police to get the full report of the incident that happened on Dana Jaffe's property. The man deputies had questioned was Richard Allen Davis. Accessing his criminal record revealed he had recently been paroled from an 8-year sentence for kidnapping.
What we learned about Davis initially was 1976 he had been arrested for robbery and kidnapping and assault with intent to commit rape. We learned in 1978 he had been arrested for another kidnapping, as well as a couple of counts of assault with a deadly weapon. 1984 he'd been arrested for a kidnapping case, assault with a deadly weapon, including the use of a firearm, and armed robbery. You start reading these reports and realize, you know, hey, this guy's a bad actor. This is an individual certainly more than capable of being involved in a crime like this.
The arrest photo on file matched the girl's description. His mother lived in Petaluma, giving him reason to have been there. The pieces were falling into place. The items discovered near Pythian Road were immediately flown to forensic specialist Chris Allen in Washington. Of the most interest was a strip of cloth that was found in the woods. Allen was quickly able to confirm what detectives had suspected.
Essentially what we're trying to do is establish whether or not the cut edges would line up or match. The middle strips represent the fabric that was found at Polly's bedroom, which were used to bind Polly's girlfriends. Subsequently, on the second submission, we received the cloth that was found at the Pythian Road site. These all fit together like a puzzle with the edges and the pieces of fabric matching up end to end.
The strips meant more than likely Polly Klaas had been out at Dana Jaffe's after her abduction. Without a doubt, Richard Allen Davis had been there too. Though it wasn't enough to arrest Davis for kidnapping, detectives felt if they could just get him in custody, they could quickly gather the evidence they needed to tie him to Polly's disappearance.
Everything else fell away, and we focused on what we had with Mr. Davis, what happened out there at Pythian Road, and what we were going to do next.
When investigators discovered Davis had an outstanding warrant for breaking parole and DUI, they decided to bring him in. But he wasn't at home when they arrived. Then a deputy sheriff who was securing a perimeter around the area stopped a van. At the wheel was Richard Allen Davis. When the deputy realized who he had, he calmly called it in to the investigators back at the house.
Is there a problem, officer?
No, sir. Just sit tight, okay?
Authorities reported to the scene, and Detective Meese approached the van and asked Davis to step out.
Step out of the van?
He informed him that he was under arrest for violation of his parole.
No. I'm Detective Meese. I'm arresting you for
One thing I think it's important to understand how Richard Allen Davis was taken in custody, because it was such a low-key event, and because Mike Meese went ahead and handcuffed him. He did it in a very professional way, and he started a rapport going with Richard Allen Davis that later was very useful in bringing resolution to the case.
It had been 2 months since Kate and Jillian had seen the man who took Polly Klaas, but they had no trouble picking him out of a lineup.
Number one, step forward, please.
Even without the beard, his was a face they could never forget.
Number one, step back, please.
Though he'd been arrested for parole violation, Davis was questioned about the kidnapping. He vehemently denied any involvement, but authorities let Davis know that if he wanted to talk, the door was open.
So I took Davis into the hallway and I told him, I said, hey, look, what you need to know is we've got all the physical evidence it takes to make this case. And all you're looking at is a kidnapping right now. So if you want to talk about it, you got to let me know. And he made a non-committal response, didn't want to talk. And I remember patting my pockets looking for a business card, didn't have a business card with me. And I said, you know, I'm going to leave my name and number with those guys, meaning the correctional deputies. And if you ever want to talk about it, you know, give me a call.
Back at the FBI latent fingerprint lab, Mike Smith was comparing the palm print found in Polly's bedroom with one that had been taken from Davis since his arrest. This was a crucial piece of evidence. Matching the two prints would undoubtedly link Davis to the abduction. After careful examination, the results were called in to Agent Fryer.
I just got a call from FBI laboratory. They matched Davis's palm print to a palm print taken off of Polly's bedroom, or her bedpost. It was again one of those moments where there's butterflies in my stomach. Again, realized that this was really very powerful evidence. So I hung up the phone, and again there was a lot of noise and commotion in the command post. I stood up and I asked everybody, "Can I have your attention, please? Can I have quiet for a moment?" I said, we just got confirmation from our laboratory that we've matched this palm print taken from the bedroom to Davis. We can place him in the bedroom. And there was just a huge cheer from everybody. Papers were flying. It was just great news to everybody.
This is it. It's concrete. He was in her bedroom. We can prove it. We had him nailed down.
Though news of the matching print had gone public, Davis was being held in isolation and had not heard anything about it. Then one day, a friend of his showed up for a visit. He urged Davis to talk to authorities and tell them where Polly was. But Davis continued to deny responsibility. Then his friend gave him the news the rest of the nation had already heard. It came as a complete surprise. Davis realized it was going to be impossible to explain how his palm print got in Polly's bedroom. There was only one thing he could do.
In Davis's mind, he's now got to do something, and that is try to make whatever deal he can make with the authorities, because we know that he was in Polly's bedroom. We can put him there.
While on his way to the massive search for Polly near Pythian Road, Detective Meese was paged to call the jail. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, and Meese was anxious about what he might find out.
After this wait, you know, Davis comes on the phone, and I recognize the voice. So I know it's him, and I said, he says to me, he says, "Hey, I screwed up. I screwed up big time."
Detective Meese and Special Agent Larry Taylor met with Davis in the interrogation room, where Davis related the details of the night of October 1st. Though he was living in something like a halfway house, he had applied for an overnight pass to go visit his mother in Petaluma. Unable to find her house, he had a few beers and walked the streets of Polly's neighborhood. At one point, he was stopped by a man who wanted to sell him some marijuana. He decided to go ahead and buy the joint. In Davis's own words, he got really buzzed and went to the store for more beer. He soon found himself wandering the neighborhood aimlessly. He wasn't sure where he was or what he was doing. But Davis had come to the neighborhood prepared. He'd brought a bag packed with bindings and tape. Forensic experts were able to determine that he had cut the strips with a pair of scissors, a fact which implies intent. Then Davis said he randomly picked a house on the street and crawled into an open window. He remembered hearing TV voices and said he may have picked up a knife from the kitchen. He said he didn't remember anything after that. He claimed the next thing he knew, he was driving in his car and was surprised to find a young girl sitting next to him. She was complaining that her hands were tingling. According to Davis, he adjusted the straps for her and drove around wondering what he had done and what he should do next. Then he drove off the side of the road and got the car stuck. Once he realized he was stuck for good, he says he got Polly out of the car and carried her up a steep embankment about 30 yards away.
Get out of the car!
He planned to leave her in the darkness until he could figure out a way to free the car. The rest of Davis's story about what happened at Pythian Road matched the witnesses' accounts. At the time of the incident, the bulletin about Polly's abduction was just going out over police radios. But the deputies were tuned to a different frequency and would not have heard it even if they had been in their cars. They ran his license, but the equipment they had at that time was only able to give a cursory printout of Davis' driving record. It couldn't generate his criminal record. They found nothing they could hold him on.
What I want you to do is, all right, go follow my finger.
Davis recalled how the deputies pulled his car out and escorted him to the main highway. But he claims that he waited for 15 or 30 minutes and returned to the site to find Polly. Then he just drove around. At some point, he realized he had to get rid of her. At long last, authorities had found out what they'd been desperate to know. Polly Klaas was dead, and Richard Allen Davis was the man responsible. Davis agreed to take them to the site in a deserted area of Cloverdale where he had left the body. It was night, but inspectors felt the need to confirm Davis's story couldn't wait until daybreak. He led them to a field near an abandoned lumber mill. Out in the field, under some boards, investigators found the body of Polly Klaas.
It was an odd feeling. You're in the presence of somebody like Davis, and just a few yards away is what's left of a very beautiful, innocent 12-year-old.
The Polly Klaas case was special because people cared. Because the whole community stepped forward and said, this is the last child you're going to take, and that this is our child, and that we are going to go out and look for her until we find her.
The case wouldn't come to trial until 1996. But after 10 weeks in the courtroom, a jury found Davis guilty on 10 counts, including kidnapping, robbery, burglary, murder, and attempting to commit a lewd act on a child. The latter charge Davis continued to deny during the entire trial. Investigators strongly believed that despite Davis's testimony, Polly was already dead at the time deputies helped him with his car. He was sentenced to death and continues to sit on death row at San Quentin Prison. Polly Klaas left behind a legacy to save other lives. The way missing persons cases are handled has changed forever since the investigation. Law enforcement databases are linked to different agencies providing vital information to multiple jurisdictions. Missing persons bulletins are now sent out over all police channels. At routine pullovers and traffic stops, officers can access not only driving histories, but criminal records as well. Implementation of the 3 strikes you're out legislation was a direct result of the case, as was the push to expedite the appeals process in murder cases. And a foundation established in Polly's name aids the search for missing children.
It looked just a little fuzzy on the website.
Involvement of the FBI was critical to bringing resolution to this case. Had they not come in and gotten involved early on, it's doubtful we would ever have had resolution, or certainly that it would have been as quickly as it was, even though it seemed like a long time.
The unique partnership that was formed between local police and the FBI set a precedent that continues to this day. One World Trade Center, New York City. Friday, February 26, 1993. The basement garage was a scene of utter destruction, cloaked in thickening smoke. A woman alone, trapped and bleeding, called police. There were many panicked calls to the NYPD that day as real life took on the trappings of a disaster movie.
Terrorist bombings are what happen in other countries, not here in the United States. And yet, in 1993, it happened in New York City. The World Trade Center bombing rattled our notion of domestic security. It shook the foundation of our belief that we're not vulnerable to terrorism. The cracks it caused in our self-confidence can never be repaired. If it happened once, could it happen again? It was the question in everyone's mind, but no one dared to say it aloud. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Somewhere in a crater, 5 stories deep, in wreckage a block wide, lay the key to the bomber's identity. At least, that's what investigators hoped.
At 12:18 p.m. on February 26, 1993, panic and confusion gripped the 110-story World Trade Center Tower 1. People were trapped in elevators. Lights went out. Smoke turned the hallways black. Thousands of the injured and panicked occupants choked as they tried blindly to escape what seemed like a nightmare. The engineer who designed the towers anticipated several potential disasters. He structurally designed them to withstand the violence of a sustained hurricane and something as unimaginable as the impact of a fully fueled jet.
Let's go!
It seemed that something had been overlooked, but no one knew what. On that day, Tower 1 became the city's tallest chimney. The stairwells acted as flues, drawing smoke up from the basement, blackening every floor. In the first chaotic hours, all officials knew for sure was that the cause of the problem was in the basement garage. Neil Herman, supervisor of the Joint Terrorist Task Force at the FBI's New York office, was just blocks away from the Trade Center. Unaware of the cause of the mayhem, the FBI took it upon themselves to respond.
Initially, we felt, and we were told, that it was possibly a fire or transformer. Within a few minutes, it became apparent from the traffic on the police channels that there was something there more than just a fire or some kind of an accident. And I dispatched, along with myself, members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force down to the World Trade Center.
The immediate concern was getting the trapped victims out of the building. Extensive damage created logistical problems for rescue workers. Many of those inside struggled to make their own way to safety. The elevators had broken down, and those on the top floor had to walk down 110 flights. There were tremendous injuries due to smoke inhalation. As hundreds of emergency personnel continued their rescue efforts, FBI agents dispatched to the Trade Center were scouring the area for any indication of what may have caused the devastation. The destruction was massive. The city streets around the complex were buckling. The Vista Hotel, which rests between the two towers, had sustained tremendous amounts of damage. It was immediately apparent to investigators that whatever occurred below the street level was powerful enough to come up through 4 levels of the parking garage, up to the street and higher. Special Agent Chuck Stern of the FBI's counterterrorism branch began the process of organizing the investigation.
It started to look like it might be an explosion, a criminal explosion. I would say maybe within an hour of the blast. And then, of course, more and more information kept coming back. You know, we had our special agent bomb technicians from the FBI were down there and, you know, working with the bomb squad from the city police department, and you know, they were reaching the same conclusion that, you know, this is what it appeared to be.
By early that evening, 200 agents and lab personnel from the explosives unit at FBI headquarters were flown in to assist the hundreds of ATF and NYPD bomb squad technicians already at the scene. Locating survivors and getting them out was the only concern. The rescue effort was largely focused in the garage area. As they slowly made their way through the wreckage, rescue workers were shocked and relieved to find survivors. As they moved onward, they reached an area that had sustained massive destruction. FBI, ATF, and NYPD bomb technicians had suited up in protective gear to aid in the search. Some carried thermal imaging cameras to scan for bodies trapped in the rubble. The discoveries became more gruesome. 6 people had been found dead. Among the dead was John DiGiovanni, a dental supply salesman who had parked his car in the underground lot. Robert Kirkpatrick, William Mako, Stephen Knapp, and Monica Smith were also killed. They'd worked for a company that provided maintenance to the World Trade Center. Monica was pregnant with her first child. Wilfredo Mercado, an employee last seen unloading a van in the garage, was found dead, buried under 12 feet of concrete. Inside the garage was an apocalyptic scene. Debris and concrete were scattered 100 yards in all directions. Hundreds of cars had been demolished, and small fires erupted from spilled gasoline. Pumps drained a flood of water and sewage from broken pipes. Overhead, 6 tons of concrete clung to warped rebars. Fiber optic cables dangled. To FBI agents, there was no way that the cause of this damage was accidental. Special Agent Chris Ronay from the FBI Laboratories Explosives Unit surveyed the damage.
Well, as we analyzed the damage to the building, even in the early stages, it was clear that there was a very large bomb, a very large explosive device of some hundreds of pounds. It was clear from the beginning. We didn't know how big it was. Placed in the basement on one of the parking garage levels, most likely in a vehicle.
If the agent's initial conclusions were correct, this was the single greatest act of terrorism on American soil at that time. The morning after the explosion, interagency teams prepared for their first extended glimpse of the destruction. In addition to the ongoing search for victims, they were now looking for any clue that could explain the explosion. But they were explicitly instructed not to move any evidence. The structural integrity at the lower levels was severely weakened. Any disturbance might cause what little support there was remaining to collapse on those inside. The floor of the B2 level of the garage had collapsed, sending hundreds of cars from 3 parking levels down several stories. All the vehicles came to rest at the bottom level, crushing the tower's refrigeration room.
Actually, the engineers told us that that debris that was piled around the columns, sort of like a soda straw stuck into a pile of sand. And you couldn't remove the debris because that would remove what little support was present and that was holding the Vista Hotel up.
Construction crews spent hours reinforcing the walls and columns in the parking levels so that agents and investigators could safely explore the scene. After several hours, agents and technicians began to make their way into the blast area.
It was very, very eerie because it was deserted and there were a lot of cars with the trunks blown open and things like that. And some of them you could hear ticking because which was kind of an eerie thing at a bomb site, because the turn signals had been activated and were actually still flashing on some of the cars.
Gradually, the searchers got closer to the origin of the blast, known as Ground Zero. The damage was so extensive that there was no conclusive evidence that pointed to the cause of the explosion. The floors were completely blown away, leaving a 5-story crater which extended through the cavity of the building. Investigators searching for explosive residues had difficulty finding them. They were mixed in with concrete debris and building materials. They had to sift through tons of dirt and rubble in the hope of finding some scrap of evidence. Hundreds of damaged vehicles were swabbed and vacuumed in search of residues. Agents persisted. Somewhere in the devastation were answers. As the images of the World Trade Center bombing were broadcast around the nation, people reacted with horror and disbelief. America's innocence had been shattered. The United States joined the list of countries hardened by terrorist attacks. Desperate to catch the bombers, the city placed a bounty on their heads, $200,000, the largest in city history. By Saturday morning, the FBI had set up a command post specifically for this investigation. Every available agent was assigned to the case. They had received hundreds of leads. Most were callers who described suspicious neighbors. Numerous groups had phoned in to claim responsibility. Though most of these leads appeared to be dead ends, they all had to be pursued. Just 2 days after the blast, as agents chased down leads, investigators processing the crime scene spotted a piece of charred, twisted steel at what was thought to be the center of the explosion. It was part of a vehicle decimated by the blast. Perhaps from the vehicle that delivered the bomb.
VIN number here.
Investigators noticed a series of digits stamped onto the metal debris. Though they were explicitly instructed not to remove evidence, they felt their finding was significant enough to override protocol. The metal debris was loaded onto a stretcher and hoisted up to the top of the crater. Once it was on the surface, agents rushed the finding to a forensics laboratory set up by the NYPD crime lab. In the lab, agents and examiners were having difficulty determining what the markings meant. An investigator from the FBI's Joint Autocrime Task Force was called to examine the debris.
I think it's 729.
His analysis would provide the first major break of the investigation. He called Special Agent Stern immediately.
He says, Chuck, I looked at this and I said to the person who was showing it to me, my man, you don't know what you have here. This is a confidential vehicle identification number.
Confidential VIN numbers are as unique to a particular automobile as fingerprints are to a person. The hidden number allows law enforcement to determine if a particular vehicle has been stolen. It also gives investigators detailed information about the vehicle, including who owns the car. Within 15 minutes, investigators were able to enter the confidential number into the National Crime Information Center computer, which lists all vehicles that have been reported stolen. A response quickly came back. The number belonged to a Ford Econoline van that had been reported stolen from DIB Leasing in Jersey City, New Jersey. The FBI's Newark office was contacted immediately. Within minutes, agents arrived at DIB. The FBI was prepared to uncover everyone or anything that had access to that van.
That this Ford Econoline van was, in fact, a Ryder rental van that had been rented by an individual by the name of Mohammed Salameh, and then later reported stolen. And they learned from the management of DIB Leasing that Salameh had put down a $400 deposit on the van, and that he had been anxiously trying to get the deposit back.
After conferring with federal prosecutors late into the evening on Wednesday, the decision was made to have an undercover FBI agent in place at DIB when Salameh returned for his deposit the next morning. They spent the remainder of the evening piecing together Salameh's history. They learned that Mohammed Salameh was a 25-year-old immigrant of Palestinian descent. He had come to the attention of authorities as a vocal supporter of Muslim fundamentalist El Said Nosser, whose scathing opposition to the Israeli, Egyptian, and United States governments was no secret. The undercover agent was posing as a Ryder representative, stating to Salameh that he needed more information about the theft of the van before refunding the deposit. After some discussion, Salameh walked out with the $400. As he stepped out of the office, dozens of FBI agents who had been monitoring their discussion descended upon Salameh. Less than 1 week after the bombing, the FBI had a suspect in custody. Salameh said little to the agents who questioned him about the bombing. They knew it was probable that he had not acted alone. The investigation was taking on a clearer focus. When Salameh was arrested, agents recovered various personal items, including his wallet, which contained several business cards and telephone numbers. They began by searching the address listed on his driver's license. A former roommate told agents that Salameh no longer lived at that address. However, they were able to find some belongings of Salameh's that he had left behind. There were news clippings and photos relating to Nosser, and a photo of him and Nosser together. There were numerous bank records. There were also more names and numbers for investigators to pursue.
We were able to obtain addresses. We were able to obtain telephone numbers. We were able to have pen registers where we were able to monitor phone calls, calls coming in and going out. And once that started, again, it opened up the floodgates.
Investigators were also receiving help from the public. A few days after Salameh's arrest, the manager of the space station storage facility in Jersey City called the FBI. Individuals who rented Unit 4344 had received several deliveries from chemical companies just prior to the Trade Center blast. The manager ordered a key and opened the unit. Inside, he found what he thought to be bomb-making paraphernalia. FBI agents would reach the same conclusion. Inside, investigators found several compounds which could be used for making explosives. Their findings were sent to the FBI lab for analysis. There were also many other leads that emerged from the search of the storage facility. Receipts for the chemicals, bank and phone records, and an unexpected bonus, a log of the suspect's comings and goings. To enter the facility, each tenant was required to punch in their special access code on a keypad located at the entrance. Each time a tenant punched in his number, it was recorded in a computer system. Agents could determine each time Unit 4344 was accessed. Meanwhile, police assembled a lineup. Doug Melvin, manager of the space station, identified Mohammed Salameh as the man who rented the locker. He recognized him easily because Salameh frequently visited his storage locker. In Melvin's experience, customers usually had no reason to do that. Continuing to search for any possible lead, agents obtained phone records from a payphone just outside the storage facility. One name on the list of individuals who received calls from that phone was already familiar to the FBI. That name was Nidal Ayyad. Nidal Ayyad's name first appeared on a business card found inside Salameh's wallet. Eyad worked as a chemical engineer. Within a week of Salameh's arrest, agents learned Eyad had called a chemical company inquiring about buying chemicals. The prospect of another bomb was frighteningly real. It appeared that another act of violence was in the making. Agents felt they had sufficient information to obtain a warrant for Ayad's arrest. On March 10th, the FBI raided his home in New Jersey as he and his family ate dinner. After searching his home, agents quickly made their way to his place of business, Allied Chemical. There they confiscated phone records and bank statements that could tie him to Salameh. The most irrefutable link between Eyad and the bomb plot, however, came from Ayad's business computer. It was seized and then thoroughly examined.
Our technical people were able to restore an erased file, which turned out to be a letter claiming credit for the World Trade Center bombing on behalf of an organization known as the Liberation Army 5th Battalion.
A similar letter had been sent to the New York Times 4 days after the explosion. In it, the group called the bombing an act of terrorism to protest American support for Israel. There was also a second letter Eyad hadn't had time to send. It promised another blast. Though the investigation was progressing very quickly, each new discovery revealed the existence of a large and ongoing conspiracy. The potential for more attacks grew more likely every day. As the FBI tried to learn more from their prime suspects in the World Trade Center bombing, Salameh and Eyad continued to stonewall their efforts. Analysis of all the confiscated phone records led investigators to an apartment in Jersey City. The landlord who owned the apartment at 40 Pamrapo Avenue confirmed that Salameh and another individual rented the apartment from early January of 1993 until the end of February, just 2 months later. The landlord could not confirm the identity of Salameh's roommate, whose name he knew only as Rashid. Most likely, that name was an alias. A search warrant was quickly issued. After executing the warrant, agents discovered that 40 Pemrapo Avenue was the bomb factory, the place where the conspirators mixed an explosive powerful enough to rock the World Trade Center. Inside the apartment and an adjacent garage, FBI forensic examiners recovered traces of a diverse range of chemicals. These items were collected and then rushed to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. While agents searched the apartment, the identity of Salameh's mysterious roommate emerged. They found papers requesting political asylum in the name of Ramzi Yousef, who, according to the documents, had been detained in September of 1992 at Kennedy Airport for entering the country without a visa. The Pemrapo Avenue apartment was a gold mine for the FBI.
All right, let's go. Go ahead, Kaz.
Before they learned of the apartment, the FBI's laboratory examiners could only speculate from residue samples taken at the Trade Center that the bomb used was comprised of the highly explosive compound urea nitrate. The discovery of the bomb factory at Pemrapo Avenue, however, made them certain. From the labs at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Special Agent Ronay reported the findings.
From the analyses in the laboratory, we concluded that it was made with urea nitrate, a homemade explosive mixture. There's no such commercial product. So they had to mix this themselves. And when we finally located the storehouse or workshop where they did make the bomb, this was confirmed. These materials or remnants of them were available and confirmed that this is what we were indeed seeing in the laboratory in these residues.
Witness interviews and phone record analysis continued, directed mainly at the locations where key elements of the conspiracy had taken place. All of those interviewed mentioned seeing a distinctive-looking individual in the company of Salameh and Ramzi Yousef. Phone records helped to identify that individual as Mahmud Abouhalima. As agents focused their investigation on Abouhalima, they learned that shortly after the bombing, he had fled the country. Abouhalima was well known to authorities through his association with El Said Nosser. Abouhalima was also close to the radical Muslim cleric Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, who would later be sentenced to life in prison for a conspiracy to bomb several New York City landmarks. Soon after agents learned that Abouhalima had fled the country, Egyptian authorities contacted the FBI to say that he'd been arrested and detained in Cairo. Abouhalima had been wanted there for conspiring against Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak. Negotiations between the United States and Egyptian governments were successful. Agents flew to Egypt and took Abouhalima into FBI custody. When he was turned over to FBI agents, his hands were cuffed and his head was entirely covered. He told the FBI that he thought he was being taken out to be shot. Relieved to now be in their custody, he spoke to agents on the flight back to New York.
He did make several statements that were used against him at trial. One of the key things that he said was, about Rashid, who was later determined to be an alias used by Ramzi Yousef.
Abouhalima told Stern that he and Yousef had met in Afghanistan at a secret camp for the Mujahideen Muslim freedom fighters, a training ground for international terrorists. At every step of the investigation, Ramzi Yousef's name appeared. He was a known international terrorist and an expert with explosives. Agents now believed he was the mastermind behind the World Trade Center bombing. The FBI began searching for Yousef. They soon learned that he fled the country the night of the Trade Center bombing. An international manhunt for Ramzi Yousef had begun. In the meantime, agents were trying to determine how and when Yousef came to the United States. It's been said that the day Ramzi Yousef arrived on American soil was the day terrorism came to America. On September 1st, 1992, the shadowy Afghan-trained master bomb maker arrived at New York's Kennedy Airport. The FBI's close scrutiny of the passenger manifest from Yousef's flight that day revealed another clue. He had not entered the country alone in September of 1992. With him was Ahmad Ajaj. But Ajaj had been detained by customs agents for producing a false Swedish passport. In Ajaj's suitcase, customs agents found a library of manuals on bomb making and guerrilla warfare. The suitcase was confiscated, and Ajaj was arrested and jailed for passport fraud. To the FBI, Ajaj appeared to be an unlikely conspirator. He had been incarcerated from September of 1992 through the bombing of the Trade Center in February of 1993. Fortunately for agents, prison policy required that all phone conversations be recorded. Ajaj had unwittingly left a trail, and agents quickly followed it.
And we began to see that he was, through various methods, predominantly through three-way calling, where he would call another individual, and then that individual would forward the calls. He was staying in contact with the other conspirators and was in fact trying to assist them in completing their mission of building this bomb.
Ajaj was questioned by FBI agents about his contacts and his knowledge of the bombing. He said little. His silence was not enough to prevent FBI agents from arresting and charging him in connection with the bombing. With 4 conspirators now in custody, authorities decided to bring them to trial while the search for other bombers continued. In September of 1993, 6 months after the bombing of the World Trade Center, Salameh, Eyad, Abouhalima, and Ajaj appeared in federal court in New York City.
By the time that the trial started in September of 1993, we really had to have 2 investigations in one. We had to have an investigation basically continuing to identify those responsible, locate those that were also charged that were fugitives, and also prepare for a 6-month trial that ultimately ended in March of 1994.
By this time, examiners had processed numerous crime scenes. The World Trade Center, the storage facility, and the bomb factory. 70% of the van that delivered the bomb had been collected. There was also a mass of receipts, phone records, and interviews. Tons of evidence had been recovered. It would now be up to a jury to determine if it was enough. By September of 1993, 6 months after the bombing, federal prosecutors were ready to present to a jury how the defendants carried out the bombing of the World Trade Center. The conspiracy began soon after Ramzi Yousef arrived in America in September of 1992. He moved in with Salameh, and the two became close friends. The friendship was founded on a mutual hatred of Israel and a desire to disrupt U.S. support of the Israeli government. They chose the World Trade Center as the stage for articulating their political agenda. The World Trade Towers are the city's tallest buildings, rising a quarter-mile above the pavement. In addition to the 2 towers, the complex includes the Vista Hotel, numerous underground shopping areas, and entrances to the subway lines that connect New York and New Jersey. Below that are 5 parking levels, each level containing more offices and businesses. The terrorists decided the bomb could cause the most damage, claim the most lives, by being placed in the garage. The plan was put into effect.
Gonna be up here.
Receipts showed that in November, Yousef used an alias to buy chemicals. Throughout the winter, he would order more as he honed the formula for his bomb and worked out the plan of attack.
Yes, it's gonna be over this level.
Where are the exits?
The chemicals were delivered to space station storage. Salameh or Yousef would sign for them, using aliases to make sure that no paper trail could lead to them. Yousef was desperate for the bomb-making manuals in Ajaj's confiscated luggage. Yousef developed a clever 3-way calling system to hide the trail from Ajaj's prison phone in New York City to his New Jersey apartment. First, Yousef called a burger stand in Dallas, Texas, where his friend Eyad Ismoil worked. Then Ismoil called Ajaj as Yousef waited on the other line.
Get them here. No. Look.
When Ajaj answered the phone in prison, Ismoil connected him with Yousef.
Ajaj, how are you doing?
Together, the three were able to discuss the bomb's construction.
I don't have the plans.
The jury was methodically being shown the lengths to which the bombers had gone to protect themselves. These bombers would not be deterred. The prosecutors continued. One winter afternoon, the bombers' plot stalled. Salameh and Yousef were driving back from Abouhalima's New Jersey home when Salameh lost control of his car. He suffered only minor injuries. Yousef was more seriously hurt. He was hospitalized for a week. Yousef made calls to chemical companies from his hospital bed. The FBI learned who he called and when through hospital phone records. As Yousef recuperated, Salameh, Eyad, and Abouhalima drove deep into the Pennsylvania woods. Here they tested a prototype of their deadly mixture. It exploded, but it needed more power. So in the coming days, Eyad would attempt to buy compressed hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is so commonly used in Middle Eastern terrorist bombings that it's considered a signature. Even though Eyad worked as a chemical engineer, he had problems finding a company that would sell it to him. On February 16th, the chemist Eyad rented a car to scout the World Trade Center. Salameh's fingerprints on the wheel revealed that he drove. His prints were also on the parking ticket for the garage's B2 level. A sketch found later showed Eyad had made a rough drawing of the floor plan. Then, just 4 days before the bombing, at Yousef's request, Eyad Ismoil arrived in New York from Dallas to help complete the bomb making. Ismoil would also drive the vehicle carrying the bomb into the garage. He was Yousef's trusted friend, and he had been a New York City cab driver. Perfect credentials for this delicate operation. On February 23rd, Salameh went to DIB Leasing and rented a 10-foot Ford Econoline panel van. He left a cash deposit of $400. Construction of the bomb was nearly complete. There was one more reconnaissance visit to the World Trade Center garage. in a burgundy Chevy Corsica rented by Eyad, with Salameh listed as the second driver. The conspirators returned to the garage with Yousef and Ismoil to determine the precise location for placing the bomb. Jurors were shown another garage claim ticket that confirmed the time of the visit, the make of the car, and the garage level they parked on, the B2 level. Meanwhile, Eyad had managed to reach a firm that would sell him compressed hydrogen. He ordered 3 large tanks, which were delivered to the space station storage the next day. On February 25th at the Pamrapo apartment, Abouhalima and the others carefully mixed sulfuric and nitric acid with glycerin into the deadly and volatile substance nitroglycerin. They mixed an estimated 1,200 pounds of urea crystals with several gallons of nitric acid. They poured it into big metal drums where it formed a gel-like mass. They transferred the urea nitrate mass into plastic trash cans. The others had backed the van down the driveway behind the house and up to the apartment door. They packed the cargo hold with their creation, a lethal cocktail of chemicals, bonding agent, fuse, and detonator. They loaded the trash cans and then arranged the home-brewed nitroglycerin among them. They had threaded 4 long fuses through surgical tubing to reduce the smoke and slow the burn enough for the bombers to escape. The fuses were rigged to blasting caps and boxes of gunpowder, and then inserted into each of the nitro containers. All that was missing was the hydrogen, which was used to make the blast even more devastating. In the Ryder van, followed by Ayad's Corsica, they drove to the space station to pick up the hydrogen. They loaded it carefully in the van, propping the 3 red tanks behind the boxes of nitro against the rear doors. Yousef and Ismoil drove the van from New Jersey to a hotel in Manhattan. Hotel records showed that Ismoil had reserved a room for the night on February 25th. They parked it out back for the night, hidden from view. At 10 that evening, from his home in Jersey City, Salameh informed New Jersey police that the van had been stolen. He spun a story about parking it at a grocery store and coming out to find it gone. Later that night, he met with police to document the loss. He knew he would need a valid police report if he was going to get his deposit back. Agents learned that Salameh had purchased a child's airline ticket abroad because it was all he could afford. He needed the van deposit back so he could upgrade the ticket to an adult fare. With the vehicle having been reported stolen, everything was in place. The bombers took their last drive to the World Trade Center. At about 2 minutes past noon the next day, Friday, February 26, 1993, the bombers' Ryder van pulled into the B2 level ramp of the World Trade Center. The burgundy Corsica followed. Ismoil drove the van as Yousef sat in the passenger seat. Pulled the van into a space normally occupied by a New York Port Authority van. Since Port Authority owns the World Trade Center, their vehicles have easy access in and out of the garage. The getaway car waited nearby. held a cigarette lighter against the fuse. As it began to burn, they rushed to the Corsica and pulled away. The flames raced along, an inch every 2.5 seconds, silent and almost smoke-free because of the surgical tubing. The gunpowder was packed into Atlas Rockmaster blasting caps, the kind used in the demolition of large building sites. 4 fuses were used to guarantee the bomb would detonate. Yousef, Ismoil, and the others exited the garage a few seconds before the blast. At 12:18 p.m., the months of planning this destruction was about to become a reality. The explosion hit the wall of the tower with a massive force, destroying everything around it. Later that day, as rescue workers and investigators were still responding to the scene, Yousef sat safely aboard an airplane to Pakistan, and Ismoil aboard a plane to Jordan. Within days, Abouhalima had also fled. If investigators had not found and tracked the VIN number so quickly, Salameh would likely have escaped too. Over the course of the 6-month trial, the jury heard from 206 witnesses and reviewed a total of 10,000 pages of testimony. In February of 1994, a year after the bombing, the trial concluded. It took the jury just 3 days to reach a verdict. The jury forewoman read off 38 pronouncements of guilty: conspiracy, explosive destruction of property, interstate transportation of explosives, and murder. When she finished, the courtroom erupted. Eyad and Salameh leapt up, screaming the verdict was an injustice. Only Abouhalima had remained silent. He sat calmly, arms folded, with a bemused smile on his face. 3 months after their convictions, on May 24, 1994, Judge Kevin Duffy sentenced each bomber to a year in prison for each year of life he had deprived the victims. It came to 240 years apiece, with no possibility of parole. Sentencing went on for hours, with each defendant making a lengthy speech. Mohammed Salameh, the chemist Nidal Ayyad, Ahmad Ajaj, the man who brought the bomb manuals into the country, and Mahmud Abouhalima, known as the Red, will spend the rest of their lives in prison. Though the trial of the 4 defendants was a success, the mastermind Ramzi Yousef and his accomplice Eyad Ismoil were still fugitives. 4 of the 6 conspirators in the World Trade Center bombing had been convicted. But the FBI still sought the mastermind of the bombing. As the search for Ramzi Yousef and his accomplice Eyad Ismoil continued, agents learned that Yousef was involved in several terrorist plots designed to bring down commercial airliners worldwide. Advisories were issued to American travelers abroad. More terrorist attacks on Americans or American interests were likely following the verdict. Yousef was one of the most dangerous and elusive men in the world.
Subsequent to the World Trade Center incident, it's obvious and apparent that he was planning additional acts of terrorism around the world. The air conspiracy case certainly reveals that the extent of what was being planned, the fact that he was moving around throughout the world, several countries, indicates a wide range of support that he and his compatriots had.
It It was not until February of 1995, 2 years after the Trade Center bomb went off, that Ramzi Yousef was apprehended in Pakistan and turned over to FBI agents. Agent Stern was sent to retrieve Yousef and bring him back. Yousef was suddenly willing to talk. His hatred for the United States and its aid to Israel was all-consuming. He told Stern that the World Trade Center was chosen as his target because it was the greatest symbol of American finance and imperialism.
He felt that it was kind of like a state of war. He compared it to the United States atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Where he said 250,000 people were killed, and he felt that if he could topple one of the towers into the other, he would kill that many people, and it was a similar type act.
The final arrest came 6 months later, in June of 1995. Eyad Ismoil was discovered and apprehended in Jordan. He too was returned to the United States to stand trial for his role in the bombing. Yousef and Ismoil were tried together in New York City. In January of 1998, after being found guilty of the same 38 charges that the other defendants had faced, a judge sentenced the two to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The judge, calling Yousef an apostle of evil, ruled that Yousef should serve the remainder of his life in solitary confinement. Only a life of solitude could prevent Yousef from conspiring to kill again. With the major conspirators imprisoned for life, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have had a chance to reflect on the magnitude of this investigation.
Well, the World Trade Center case really, in many ways, was a real wake-up call for law enforcement. It was the largest single act of international terrorism in the country. And although terrorism has been here for many years, certainly on the scope that we saw the World Trade Center was something that was unique and certainly much more horrific than we've seen in the past.
The bombers did $550 million worth of destruction to the World Trade Center. The financial damage caused by the disruption of national and international business was also deeply felt. America had been jolted from its belief that international terrorist attacks don't happen on American soil. By bringing such a complex and far-reaching conspiracy to a close so quickly, the FBI sent a message around the world. The taking of innocent lives will never be tolerated. A young man plans elaborate crimes he believes will net him millions of dollars. As he puts his violent schemes in motion, the lives of innocent people and police officers mean nothing. The FBI tries to bring him to justice, but they soon find themselves up against a criminal enterprise.
Caught in the act, a disguised bank robber hurled explosives at police and disappeared in a hail of bullets. When police identified the suspect, they connected him to an armed kidnapping, but they couldn't find him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The suspect's behavior was organized but unpredictable. Everyone leaves a trail, and agents hoped they could pick up the right one.
Martinez, California is a suburban city 30 miles north of Oakland. As dawn broke on October 15th, 1993, most of Martinez was still asleep. Nobody noticed the dark figure creeping across the rooftop of a downtown bank. He carried a top-of-the-line cordless power saw and drill with special motors that reduced noise. He seemed to know exactly where to cut into the roof. The masked man exploited a flaw in the bank's security system. The alarm was unable to detect movement in the crawl space between the roof and the bank's ceiling, allowing him to move freely. Just below was the bank's office. It was rigged with motion sensors. He knew if he descended below, he'd trip the bank's alarm. The masked man also knew bank employees would arrive in a few hours and deactivate the security system. He settled in and waited for them. Hours later, Martinez residents began their morning commutes. Two miles from the Martinez Bank, in the city of Pleasant Hill, a police operator answered a seemingly unrelated emergency call. Someone saw two Hispanic males entering a supermarket with guns in their waistbands.
Copy that, 220 on a move.
It was just before 9 a.m. Pleasant Hill police officer Bob Lauderdale responded to the supermarket.
M1, who's the reporting party?
He's still on the line, a payphone.
Or my dispatcher advised that the person making the call was calling from a public phone directly across the street from the store.
He just hung up. He gave his name as Kyle Farrell.
I noticed a black male adult standing in front of the phone booth. He was wearing a black varsity-type jacket with tan sleeves and carrying a full-face motorcycle helmet.
Officer Lauderdale and Sergeant Gary Ezel entered the supermarket to investigate. They would begin an aisle-by-aisle search for the suspects. Back in the city of Martinez, the masked man had waited 3 hours in the crawl space above the bank's ceiling. Bank employees were preparing to open to the public. They deactivated the alarm when they arrived.
How's vacation?
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Great,
Nice to be back at the office.
The masked man watched a teller punch in her access code to the ATM room where she would fill the machines with cash. It was his cue for a dramatic entrance. The door automatically locked behind the teller. The robber threatened to kill her co-worker if she didn't open the door. Then he opened it himself. The bank's manager was in the break room. She heard the commotion and glass breaking.
Put the money in the bag! Go to hell! Hurry up! Put the money in the bag!
She slipped out and called 911.
Hurry up, put the money in the bag! Come on!
Report of a 211 bank in progress, 6678 Alhambra
Dispatch
Avenue.
alerted Martinez police.
The manager of the bank is advising that she heard someone in the other room shouting, "Get your hands up," to her tellers.
All available units raced to the bank with their sirens off. The robber left with a backpack stuffed full of cash. But to keep it, he'd have to evade Martinez police. Officers arrived at the front of the bank. Martinez and Pleasant Hill police departments had only 9 officers available to respond. And 2 of them were tied up on a suspicious call at a supermarket. The robber saw an easy escape, the back of the bank, but he needed a diversion. Martinez traffic officer Earl Moffat moved to cover the rear of the bank. In his 10 years on the force, this would be the first time Officer Moffat would fire his weapon.
He's firing rounds at me, and he's only about 20 yards away. So what was going through my mind is just chaos.
As the gun battle continued, Pleasant Hill police were still investigating the 911 call about 2 men with weapons entering the supermarket.
No, I sure haven't.
None of the employees saw anything out of the ordinary.
Have you seen anything like this? I haven't seen anything like that.
Yes, I'm at the rear.
Okay.
Request mutual aid response from Pleasant Hill ASAP. Okay, Bob, we gotta go.
All right.
Officer Lauderdale was immediately suspicious.
After we were unable to locate anybody matching that description, I thought the bank robbery in Martinez was too big of a coincidence.
In Martinez, the bank robbery suspect continued his firefight with Officer Moffat.
I couldn't copy. Sam 24 to 97.
His weapon empty, the officer was forced to reload. The gunman used the moment to his advantage. Moffat knew he would be vulnerable to ambush if he climbed over the fence. He followed procedure and called for backup.
He went westbound over the fence.
As officers cordoned off the neighborhood, Martinez police were joined in the investigation by the FBI and Supervisory Special Agent Bob Moore. The FBI automatically investigates all bank robberies. Any crime against those institutions is a federal offense.
We have concurrent jurisdiction and traditionally have worked bank robberies very closely with local police. When I first arrived, the scene was quite chaotic. We had been notified that a robbery had occurred and that a gunfight had ensued after the robbery.
Commander Tom Simonetti supervised the crime scene investigation for Martinez police.
At the crime scene, we found shell casings from a Glock 45 pistol, as well as expended rounds that had been fired at our officer.
FBI agents know most bank robberies are poorly planned attempts to get drug money. The evidence this robber left behind suggested a more sophisticated criminal.
The method of operation was so unique. You just don't see robberies committed every day by people dropping through the roof on a rope.
On the rooftop, evidence technicians processed the abandoned power tools. They found no fingerprints. Agents interviewed bank employees about their traumatic experience. They described the robber as a muscular black male in a red jacket. The average bank robbery nets just $3,000. The bank manager determined that the robber escaped with over $35,000. And by getting it from the ATM room, no die packs were placed in with the money. Technicians found no fingerprints, but discovered a shoe print on the desk where the robber landed. While the crime scene was being processed, Martinez police combed the neighborhood behind the bank for the masked suspect. They soon picked up his trail. It was marked by $20 bills that had fallen from his backpack. But the money trail abruptly ended at the closed end of a cul-de-sac, leaving no sign of the suspect.
I have followed the money trail up to the cul-de-sac.
Pleasant Hill police officer Lauderdale was guarding the crime scene when he recognized someone in the crowd of onlookers.
I suddenly noticed that the subject I had seen making the 911 call was now standing in a group of people who were watching the activities at the bank robbery. I thought this was too much of a coincidence, seeing the same subject down at the shopping center and was now at the bank robbery in Martinez. I contacted the subject in order to identify him and find out what he was doing in the area. What are you doing here today?
The officer knew the 911 caller at the supermarket gave dispatchers the name of Kyle Farrell. Now the man said his name was Ural Wills.
Oh, it's around the corner. I just didn't want to interfere. All right.
It was suspicious enough for Officer Lauderdale to request the man to go to the police station for questioning.
The subject was surprisingly cooperative and had no problem with going to talk to Martinez detectives.
The man furnished Martinez police with a driver's license that seemed to confirm his name was Ural Wills. A check of his record revealed that 3 years earlier, in 1990, he was arrested for an armed robbery of a supermarket in Oakland, but was later acquitted. Despite the prior arrest, police had nothing linking the man to the Martinez bank robbery. They had no choice but to release him. They didn't know that uncovering the man's true identity would lead them to the bank robber, who was willing to kill to escape police. In Martinez, California, a bank robber threatened employees' lives until he got what he came for. $35,000 in cash intended for the bank's ATM machines. Police searched for the suspect by following a trail of $20 bills near the crime scene until it ended in a residential cul-de-sac. For FBI Supervisory Special Agent Bob Moore, the end of the trail was itself a clue.
We don't have that yet. We're still waiting. The trail of $20 bills stopped there. So initially we assumed that there had been a getaway car somewhere near that end of that cul-de-sac.
Can you recall if anything early today
Martinez police interviewed residents who lived in the ordinarily quiet suburban area. One homeowner said that earlier in the day he was working in his front yard. he noticed a brand new Jeep Cherokee speed past his home. He thought the white female behind the wheel might have been just a reckless teenager. The witness said the vehicle had no license plates, only a placard from a nearby Jeep dealership. Several other witnesses in the neighborhood also saw the vehicle, but none of them could agree on the Jeep's color.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you. I may call on you again, boss.
Supervisory Special Agent Bob Moore pursued the vehicle lead.
Yes, Bob Moore with the FBI. How you doing?
He called the dealership advertised on the SUV and learned they sold over 60 new Jeep Cherokees in the past 3 months.
Good. Yeah. We began identifying the people who had purchased those cars with negative results.
Each Jeep Cherokee had to be investigated. Martinez Police Commander Tom Simonetti knew it would be painstaking work.
We also talked to several of the registered owners of new Jeeps, and they had either no criminal record or they had been out of town and were able to prove that they weren't involved in the robbery. We found that one had been stolen from a nearby BART station. The vehicle was recovered in the city of Concord, and after investigating it and processing it, it was determined that it was not involved in the crime. The last 2 Jeeps that we looked at were both sold to a rental car company in the city of Antioch.
This is what we have here. Anything else?
Agents went to the rental company to investigate the last 2 vehicles.
You can get me the rental paperwork on this last week. I need to know.
They requested copies of the rental contracts. They learned one of the Jeeps was rented the day before the robbery and returned the following evening. The name on the contract was one Ural Wills, the name used by the motorcyclist in the Martinez Bank parking lot, who was also the same man police observed making a 911 call near a Pleasant Hill supermarket. Martinez police needed to clear up the question of how Ural Wills could have simultaneously fled from the area in a Jeep and been spotted in the bank's parking lot as an onlooker. For answers, they turned to Officer Lauderdale.
Take a quick look at these. When I had presented the picture of Ural Wills and in the photo lineup to Officer Lauderdale, he identified a different person as Ural Wills.
Lauderdale picked the photo of Doug Jones, a known criminal associate of Ural Wills.
In looking into Mr. Wills's criminal history, we determined that he had an accomplice who had committed several crimes with him.
Detectives believed that the accomplice, Doug Jones, posed as Wills at the scene of the robbery to throw off police. They now considered Wills their prime suspect. To agents, it was clear why Jones made the call while the bank robbery was in progress.
Yeah, that's who I contacted.
The planning of this included the attempt to create a diversion of the police by making a 911 call to the Pleasant Hill Police Department.
Martinez police ran a more detailed background check on Ural Wills. They spoke to the Oakland detectives that arrested him 3 years ago for a supermarket robbery. They expressed their frustration that he was later acquitted. Martinez commander Tom Simonetti learned of yet another recent arrest of Ural Wills.
During this investigation, we had found that Mr. Wills had been arrested by the California Highway Patrol for carrying a loaded Glock pistol.
Martinez police discovered that the bank robber also used a Glock pistol. Ballistics tests on the recovered bullets revealed that they were from a Glock 9mm. Martinez investigators also learned from Oakland criminal informants that Wills often preyed on other criminals.
He had made several armed robberies of known drug dealers in the city of Oakland, which led us to believe we were dealing with somebody who either wasn't afraid or was very brazen in his criminal activity.
The same criminal informants gave police insight to Ural Will's methods of operation. They said he often used female getaway drivers because Wills believed they were less suspicious to police. The fact that a woman was seen behind the wheel of the Jeep was consistent with Will's criminal history. From the auto rental contracts, agents were able to trace Ural Will's financial records.
The Jeep Cherokee had been paid for with a credit card by Wills. We determined through subpoenas that the credit card had been issued by a credit union in Berkeley.
I'd like to know if Mr. Ural Will...
They also learned Wills had a savings account at the credit union, but found no unusually large deposits that could be linked to the Martinez bank robbery.
We asked the employees at the credit union if he were to appear at the credit union to call the Berkeley Police Department.
Thank you very much.
Even without any suspicious bank deposits, agents and Martinez Police Commander Tom Simonetti still believed evidence implicated Wills in the bank robbery. Wills had an apartment in Antioch, California, 20 miles east of Martinez.
Based on the information compiled by the Martinez Police Department, the FBI, and the Antioch Police Department, we were able to obtain a federal search warrant of Mr. Will's apartment in the city of Antioch.
30 days after the bank robbery, FBI agents and a police SWAT team prepared to execute the search warrant on Will's apartment. They knew he had already fired 10 rounds at a Martinez police officer. The SWAT team suspected Wills would shoot again. FBI agents and a Martinez police SWAT team were serving a search warrant on an apartment belonging to bank robbery suspect Ural Wills. They found one man in the apartment. The SWAT team quickly determined he was not Wills. They identified him as Doug Jones, who was a known criminal accomplice of Ural Wills, as well as Wills' roommate. Jones was the man seen making the 911 call near a supermarket before the Martinez bank robbery, and the man spotted in the bank parking lot after the robbery. Officers removed Jones from the apartment and took him to the station for questioning. As investigators executed their search warrant, they found several items of interest, including a bulletproof vest. Agents also found a red jacket that matched witness descriptions of the bank robber's clothing. In the bedroom, they identified a pair of sneakers as the type worn by the robber. They found an even more telling clue inside one of the shoes. $3,000, all in $20 bills. The stolen money from the Martinez bank was also entirely in $20 bills. The shoes were sent to the lab where the soles could be compared to a shoe print recovered from the Martinez bank robbery. Detectives also uncovered hospital bills that suggested Wills was injured on the day of the bank robbery. Martinez Police Commander Tom Simonetti followed up.
Upon contacting the doctor at the hospital, he told us that Mr. Wills had told him that he slipped on a wet floor at a grocery store and broke his foot. The doctor, however, pointed out that the injury was more consistent with a hard impact, in particular a straight down impact from falling or dropping off something.
Wills was further tied to the crime when analysts confirmed one of the shoes found in his apartment matched the shoe print taken at the scene of the Martinez robbery. At the police station,
Where's Mr. Willis?
Agents questioned Will's roommate and criminal associate, Doug Jones. As suspicious as Jones' actions were, police couldn't charge him with a crime or make him talk. If Jones knew where Wills was hiding, he wasn't telling investigators.
The biggest frustration in this case was trying to locate Mr. Wills after he knew we were looking for him.
222, go ahead.
We had searched his residence, we had contacted everybody that knew him, and there was no doubt he knew we were after him.
Agents knew Wills was a career criminal and were certain he would strike again. They spent nearly a month searching Bay Area neighborhoods Wills was known to frequent. They found no sign of the violent fugitive. While investigators hunted for Wills, he was planning a crime even more ambitious than his Martinez bank robbery. He gathered a group of accomplices and filled them in on his plan. Four days before Christmas in 1993, Will's accomplices descended upon the Antioch, California home of jewelry store owner Gene Mayer and his wife Ruth. They posed as detectives investigating credit card fraud. Once the door was opened, they revealed their sinister purpose.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! You're too low, man! Get on the ground now! Get down there! Get down! Stay quiet! You won't get hurt! Shut up! Shut up! Now!
Two bound the couple with duct tape, while a third moved toward the back of the house to look for a safe.
If you guys stay quiet, don't move, you won't get hurt. You got the safe? Good. Let's go. Get up, get up, get up, get up there.
The men told Gene Mayer they were kidnapping his wife. They said they'd phone with the details on how he could retrieve her. Mayer could do nothing, as Euro Will's accomplices left with his wife and a safe full of jewelry. They used Mrs. Mayer's Suburban as their getaway vehicle.
Get in there. Let's go.
Just 10 minutes later, Gene Mayer freed himself and called 911. Antioch police responded. The scene was supervised by Sergeant Scott Williford.
When I arrived at the Mayer residence, officers were in the process of cordoning off the crime scene with police tape and barriers. I went inside the residence, and Gene Mayer was in the process of being interviewed. He was very traumatized.
You've got to do it. Get after it.
Detectives tried to focus Mr. Mayer on describing his wife's abductors,
I need this.
but he got only brief glances at them.
All right, okay. What did they take? Well, it took the
As detectives processed the house for evidence, they discovered a ransom note.
One was white, one was...
Mayer never saw the kidnappers leave it. The note warned him not to contact the authorities. Gene Mayer worried that he might have made a mistake by calling police. He feared the kidnappers would retaliate by killing his wife. To help find Mrs. Mayer, Antioch police requested assistance from the FBI. They searched for any sign of Ruth Mayer's Suburban that her abductors used as a getaway vehicle. Investigators knew the chances of finding a kidnapping victim alive diminish the longer the victim is held captive. Officers in Antioch and neighboring communities urgently scoured parking lots at shopping centers thinking the kidnappers might have abandoned Mrs. Mayer's SUV and switched to another vehicle.
Yeah, we'll go in the back.
They found nothing.
Still on the airport road, looking for that something.
You got to do it. Get after it. I mean,
Detectives learned that the jewelry in the stolen safe was worth $400,000. But Mr. Mayer wasn't concerned about the jewelry. He wanted his wife returned unharmed. Blindfolded during her abduction, Ruth Mayer had no idea where she was or what the kidnappers had in store for her. Bank robbery suspect Ural Wills used a team of accomplices to rob a jewelry store owner and kidnap his wife. Inside the Mayer home, Antioch police analyzed the ransom note left behind by the suspects. The kidnappers demanded $2 million for the safe return of Mrs. Mayer. Police anticipated they would phone with instructions. Technicians installed phone traps to trace and record any incoming calls. But none came. For more leads, Antioch Police Sergeant Scott Williford gathered details about the jewelry stolen from the house.
I want you guys to do your job.
If any of it turned up, it might put them on the trail of the kidnappers.
Since Mr. Mayer was a jeweler, he had specific detailed information on the description of all the jewelry. We were able to provide or compile a detailed list and put it out to other agencies regarding the stolen property.
The FBI brought additional resources and helped coordinate the search for any sign of Mrs. Mayer or the Suburban her abductors stole from her driveway. By the following morning, investigators were still combing the Mayers' neighborhood for clues.
Teams of officers and agents began talking to people in the neighborhood. We were knocking on doors asking if people had seen anything suspicious in the area.
In addition to interviewing neighbors, investigators like Antioch Police Sergeant Scott Williford turned to the media for help.
We did everything possibly that we could to get the information out to the public so we could have the public's assistance in trying to locate Ruth Mayer.
Hundreds of volunteers distributed over 8,000 leaflets throughout the Bay Area. The leaflets had photos of Mrs. Mayer and a description of her Suburban. The strategy quickly brought results.
Within hours after the kidnapping, with the information put out to the other agencies, we located the Suburban that was stolen.
Technicians processed the vehicle for evidence. They found nothing useful. Investigators theorized that the kidnappers transferred Ruth Mayer to a second getaway vehicle. They took impressions of fresh tire tracks found at the scene. The impressions could be compared to the suspect's vehicle if it was found. Although they had found her vehicle, detectives still had no clue where Mrs. Mayer was being held. The kidnappers left her unattended for hours at a time. She used the opportunity to bite through her restraints. Mayer knew an escape attempt was too risky. Instead, she memorized the details of the garage in case she was ever asked to identify it. In the driveway, she saw the outline of a car. It was covered with a blue tarp. Mayer thought about shouting for help, but she was concerned what might happen if her abductors heard her. For the time being, she had no choice but to wait. Mr. Mayer quickly raised the money he hoped would bring his wife home. Wearing latex gloves, agents recorded the bill's serial numbers. They were prepared to make the drop as soon as they received instructions from the kidnappers. Two days after the kidnapping, police responded to a call from a Berkeley credit union. The FBI had asked the manager to call police if he saw the suspect from the Martinez bank robbery. He spotted Ural Wills trying to make a deposit.
Looks like it's all here. Bring up your account number.
The teller tried to access the account, but it was frozen.
Sometimes that works.
Berkeley police arrived and calmly approached the bank, but Wills spotted them. As they frisked Wills, Berkeley police retrieved a loaded clip for a 9mm Glock pistol. They also found Wills had something else to hide.
Located in his pocket was a key to a car. The police officers asked him where his car was parked. He denied owning a car. The officers then walked down the street checking vehicles until they located his vehicle.
The keys in Wills' pocket fit a Ford Explorer. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Bob Moore searched the impounded vehicle for evidence that would link Wills to the Martinez bank robbery. Instead, he uncovered the first break in the Ruth Mayer kidnapping case.
The key items of evidence found in the Ford Explorer the day of Wills' arrest were a cell phone, a weapon, a pager that belonged to Ural Wills, and a bag containing jewelry.
Agents had previously thought the Ruth Mayer kidnapping and Martinez bank robbery cases were unrelated. All that changed when they discovered some of the jewelry was personalized. RM were the initials of Ruth Mayer. Agents showed the jewelry to Ruth Mayer's husband, who confirmed it was stolen from their home. Investigators now considered Wills a suspect both in the Ruth Mayer kidnapping and the Martinez bank robbery. To further tie Wills to the Martinez bank robbery, FBI technicians performed ballistics tests on the Glock handgun recovered from Wills' vehicle. They compared the bullets test-fired by the Glock in the lab to bullets recovered from the Martinez bank crime scene. The tests indicated the bullets were not fired by the same gun. Investigators believed Wills probably disposed of the pistol used during the bank robbery and replaced it with another gun of the same make and model.
All right, we found the jewels in your car. I want to know where you were and what you were doing.
Wills was no longer just a bank robbery suspect. He was also a suspect in the Ruth Mayer kidnapping.
We can already connect you to Mrs. Mayer. What these jewels are doing in...
Desperate to save Mrs. Mayer's life, Antioch police asked Wills to tell them where she was being held. But Wills refused to cooperate. He remained silent on his involvement in the Ruth Mayer kidnapping. With Wills in jail, investigators were concerned his accomplices would panic and do something desperate.
This kidnapping certainly exhibits some organization to it. But
Authorities held a press conference to appeal for new leads. They also warned Wills' accomplices that they were closing in and that Mrs. Mayer should be released unharmed.
On the other hand, I can't say for certain, but certainly we're looking at them.
I've been here. This what was telling me. Nobody
Nobody's telling me nothing.
On the 4th day of Mrs. Mayer's captivity, Christmas Eve, the man guarding Mrs. Mayer received instructions from the other accomplices in the kidnapping plot. His orders were to get rid of Mrs. Mayer any way he could. The man ordered her to stay down and out of sight while he drove. Mrs. Mayer couldn't be sure whether she was going to live or die.
That's it.
Kidnapping victim Ruth Mayer had endured 4 days of captivity. The ringleader of the abduction, Ural Wills, was in police custody on bank robbery charges. That left Wills' accomplices leaderless, and they were worried that the law was closing in. The accomplices ordered the man guarding Ruth Mayer to get rid of her any way he could. "30 miles north of her Antioch, California home where she was abducted, in a town called El Sobrante, the kidnappers decided to get rid of Mrs. Mayer by releasing her.
Now don't take off your blindfold.
Antioch Police Sergeant Scott Williford believed police efforts to reach the kidnappers through the media paid off.
Well, they knew the seriousness of the crime. They knew the pressure was on. This was a national publicized case at the time, and they didn't know what to do. It was so high profile, everybody knew all the details of this, and they were forced to release her.
News of Ruth Mayer's return made headlines and the local newscasts.
I just want to say that I'm so very happy to be home.
Anything that you can.
Investigators questioned Mrs. Mayer about her ordeal. She didn't know the location in which she was held and could not describe her abductors. Even so, she provided agents with important detail.
She was able to use her senses as she was held in this garage and actually had remarkable recall as to a lot of the circumstances that were occurring in the area where she was held. She described certain sounds that she heard while she was held. She described the sound of trains going by. She described the sounds of buses or diesel-powered vehicles having to gear down or slow down as if to take a sharp turn.
We've gotten a fair amount.
Based on information obtained from Mrs. Mayer, investigators were looking for a location near train tracks and major bus lines. They used the cell phone seized in Will's vehicle to narrow the search. Agents quickly obtained the phone's billing records.
And they just make their way heading east.
They concentrated on calls Wills made around the time of Mrs. Mayer's kidnapping.
We were able to track the cell phone usage and determine where it had been in use the prior night, including in Antioch and as well as the numbers that it had called that night.
Investigators learned towers in West Contra Costa County picked up Will's cell phone signal on the evening of the kidnapping. They began looking for streets in Contra Costa County where train tracks and major bus lines intersected. Based on Mrs. Mayer's observations, agents were looking for any home that had a vehicle covered with a blue tarp in the driveway.
We located the house in San Pablo, and just from the visual inspection outside, it matched the criteria and the description that Ruth Mayer gave us.
Agents obtained a search warrant for the home and found no one inside. Mrs. Mayer identified the garage as the place in which she was held. Agents wanted to question the home's owner, but they were unable to locate him. Investigators sought out homeowner's relatives in an effort to find him. Edward Rodriguez was the homeowner's nephew. Agents were unaware that he guarded Ruth Mayer during the kidnapping. But Rodriguez mistakenly believed the agents were looking for him and said he was just about to turn himself in.
It will be used against you in a court of law.
Investigators found Rodriguez remorseful about the part he played in the kidnapping and convinced him to cooperate.
How about picking out some for me?
Ultimately, the guard confessed to the whole crime, confessed to the planning, the details of the operation, and laid out the whole crime from A to Z.
Rodriguez named all the conspirators in the scheme.
Anybody else here on this page?
He said Ural Wills planned and led the kidnapping operation. Agents corroborated the guard's statements with Wills' cell phone records. They later apprehended all the conspirators. Brian Tomasello, one of the gunmen that burst into the mayor's home, was found guilty on 6 counts of robbery and kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. Edward Rodriguez was found guilty of kidnapping and robbery. The jury gave him a short 8-year sentence because he released Mrs. Mayer. Before he could be tried for the Ruth Mayer kidnapping, Ural Wills was found guilty of the Martinez bank robbery and was sentenced to 39 years. Prosecutors learned that Wills was suffering from kidney failure. Doctors gave him less than 10 years to live.
Ural Wills is already going to be...
Wills was certain to die in prison.
He's having serious kidney.
Prosecutors informed Mrs. Mayer of their plans not to try him for her kidnapping.
She's a forgiving person. She knew justice was served. She knew he was in custody, Mr. Wills, for the rest of his life. And I believe that she forgave everybody.
As he pursued his violent schemes, Ural Wills had expected to make millions and live a life of luxury. Instead, the FBI and local police made sure the criminal's last days were spent behind bars.